I've been a Ninja Turtles fan since the 80s. You know, during that cheesy time that everybody keeps thinking that's the most authentic of authentic cartoons, which it wasn't. It did kind of transform over the years. It did go back to its roots, its darker roots, its IDW comic roots. But, of course, it was bought by Nickelodeon, and things kind of, well, the Nickelodeon version brought it back to them being teenagers. But I'm not so much getting into that, and I'm not so much the history of it, because I don't know a lot of the history of it. But this is all about this movie. Now, let's be honest here. This movie, by far, surpassed the first one. Now, before I get into my review, I want to let you guys know that I am not going to make a spoiler form of this. There's going to be spoilers in this because I'm just lazy like that. So I'm going to pretty much spout everything that's in my brain about this movie. My good, my bad, even, well, good and bad. Let's put it this way. And also I'm going to talk about characters, major plot points, as well as the secondary characters and villains. So if you guys don't want to hear it, by all means, do not listen to this. So let's get started with this review. Now, honestly, guys, like I said before, this is far better than the first one. The one thing they done right with this movie is they focused on the turtles. They didn't have a human element in there. They actually focused on the turtles, and they gave the turtles a conflict that they've been battling with probably since the first one. Now, the turtles long to be human. The reason why they want to be human is because they want to fit in. And Mikey actually had a taste of it when he went into the Dia de la Muerte parade that they had in New York, or the Day of the Dead, whatever it could be, but I think that's probably what it is. Either it's a Halloween parade or something else. They said a Halloween parade, but anyway, I'm going too much into this. But the thing of it is that they actually did do a good job in having some conflict within the turtles and literally having them separated before coming together. Now, the one thing I also love is that, not to be rude or crude about it, but let's be honest, Splinter was a total dick in the first one. He was the most mean of the mean so-called dad senseis I've ever seen in my life. And there was no legit reason why he was mean at all. Now, in this one, he actually was a loving father. He behaved like a loving father, and he allowed the turtles to make their choice at the very end. That's what I wanted in the beginning, and we got it in this one. They did that right. Now, as for the look of the turtles, they look more like turtles. They look more like reptiles. But they're not as scary looking as they did, as they looked in the first one. Being 6 feet high, pretty much as high as a skyscraper, the size of a transformer. They actually were big for their size, but there was legit reason. They were actually a little bit thinner than they were before. But other than that, I had no beef with how the turtles looked. I love their personalities. They were actually a joy in this movie. Now, let's move on to the human element of this whole thing. We got Vernon, we got April, and we also have the newcomer of this entire movie, Casey Jones. Yes, this is a Casey Jones origin story, but they've done it right. This is before Casey Jones went vigilante. But they did it to the point where it didn't overshadow or eclipse the turtles. They actually had it in the background, but they put it there when it was supposed to be put there. Now, as for April, my biggest gripe in the first one was that April O'Neil was too much in the movie and was all about her and her sex appeal. Her sex appeal was toned down. Yes, there was a midriff scene. Yes, there was a scene where she dressed up as a cosplayer. I guess that was a cosplayer. I don't know. But other than that, they toned down the sex appeal for April. She still was attractive. They still showed, you know, she still looked attractive. She didn't look frumpy or anything. And I don't think you can make Megan Fox look frumpy. But they made it to the point where it wasn't all about her and her sex appeal. They toned that back. They made her into a secondary asset like they did in the 80s cartoons. Because when April O'Neil back in the 80s, besides the whole yellow jumpsuit that I'm kind of happy she did not wear, she was used as a tool. She was used as an information tool to get to the turtles so they can fix the problem. That is how they have her in this movie. They made her into a true investigative reporter and gave her some purpose. And I'm happy that they did that for her. And the same thing with Vernon. Even though Vernon did not have to be in this movie at all, they had to make the whole overall plot at the very end make sense. The fact that the turtles did save the day, but since the fact that they're big, giant, huge, hulking turtles that can scare the crap out of people, they had to have a human representative that take their place as the savior of the day. So they actually had Vernon take their place, and I'm fine with that. I am absolutely okay with that. Even though Vernon could be not in this movie and I would still be alright, the one thing is they actually gave him some purpose towards the very end. He just wasn't there to be a scapegoat. He actually was there for a purpose, and he did aid in the assistance of the turtles. And he was actually used as I guess he was used as a calling card for April. I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely okay with that. They did a good job with making the humans secondary, unlike the first one. Now, let's move on to the villains. Okay, the one big problem about superhero movies, and I'm taking off of this and going into a superhero movie. The thing is, the biggest problem with Marvel is their villains. They never have their villains right. They always have the heroes great, but the villains weak and mediocre. The one thing about this one is they didn't have their villains to be weak and mediocre, especially how much of a throwback this movie was to the 80s cartoon. The biggest issue is you didn't have enough of them. Now, what I mean by that is that we had the Shredder in the first one. The Shredder was the main villain in the first one. He was the main big boss. Now, in this one, he was the secondary boss to Krang's main boss. I'm alright with that. It should have been in reverse in the cartoons, in my opinion. But they did somewhat of an okay job with that. But here's the big rub for me. They didn't give you a legit reason why Krang just wanted to show up and take over Earth. They didn't give you a legit reason in the 80s, so I guess, well played. But other than that, my biggest problem is that they didn't really do much with Shredder. Shredder is a master fighter. He is literally a ninja master. Why wasn't he fighting? He was barely fighting in this movie. And going back to fighting, the Turtles barely did fighting. All they did was parkour. And I'm like, okay, you guys have weapons, use them. They've used them a few times, but not throughout the entire movie. And that disappointed me a little bit. Now let's talk about Krang. The biggest thing about Krang was the fact that everybody wanted Krang to look like Krang in the 80s. He doesn't. But it's not bad. They want to make him as realistic and authentic, as alien as he possibly can be. Not a complete laughing stock as he was in the 80s. They wanted him to look like an actual alien. I'm alright with that. I was okay with the fact that he looked like a big giant water bubble gum covered in snot. I'm okay with that. I can deal. But the one thing that kind of took it all back for me, and I didn't have much gripe with Krang, was the suit. His robot suit was fly. I'm not gonna lie. It was great. It was a perfect throwback upgrade to the 80s cartoon. It was definitely an upgrade. I loved it. I thought he would be a great villain. The thing is, there really wasn't much of Krang to make him menacing and intimidating. But we had Shredder there, but he didn't do much either. And then we also had one person that was not utilized at all, but could have been a great asset to the movie. No, it was not Stephen Amell's character of Casey Jones. No, it was not Vernon. No, it was not any of the other characters, but it was Karai. They had Karai in this movie, and for those that have actually seen the Nickelodeon cartoon, we know how hardcore Karai is. She was not utilized at all in this movie. She was barely there. She was there for a few scenes, maybe to say a few words. But for the fight scene, she fought against April and Vernon and lost. Really? There's no way that Karai will lose. She would take them down within 5 seconds. And she lost like that. They tried to make this movie as consistent as they could make it, but so much being thrown in there, some of it got lost in the fold and not even mentioned again. Especially the first one, when we actually saw that the guy who was supposed to play Shredder, William Fichtner, wasn't mentioned at all. His rich character was not mentioned at all, and I forgot his name. I think it was Sax. Yeah, he wasn't mentioned at all. He was an afterthought. But other than that, the one thing is that you had the whole journey quest, or the whole treasure quest, and they pretty much made it into a treasure quest. You had to find these three pieces that were scattered all over the earth to put together so you can make the portal to bring in the Technodrome. I'm like, really? You made it a search quest? Honestly, I don't know. That was kind of lazy in my opinion. But here's one thing that kind of made me like this movie even more. What made me like this movie more was definitely Rocksteady and Bebop. The fact that Seamus played Rocksteady, I had some concerns, mainly because of his thick Irish accent. But honestly, I guess because I remember, how they had a really thick New York accent in the 80s. And then you have Seamus that's playing Rocksteady and how that's going to go. Sheamus acted like Sheamus in the WWE. It worked. It worked. It doesn't explain the mohawk though, but it worked. I thought he was going to be playing Bebop, but I guess it would make sense for him to play Rocksteady because he's a big hunking huge wrestler. But then you got Bebop, who was really funny. He was pretty much comic relief, but the guy actually could throw down. I enjoyed Rocksteady and Bebop. They were my biggest grin-making moment that I have seen in that movie. I enjoyed it. I really did. I loved every bit of it. I love Rocksteady and Bebop, and I hope they're in the third one. But there's also another gripe, a character that I think should not have been played by this guy. It was miscasting on their part, but he made the best of it, and that's Tyler Perry. Despite my personal feelings towards Tyler Perry, I don't think he played a good Baxter Stockman. Number one, because he was 3 feet taller than the actual actor who plays Shredder. And number two, he was too freaking heavy. And I mean by that is towards the end when they were dragging him off to some kind of secret lair in Tokyo, this dude they literally had a tough time dragging him away. We know how big Tyler Perry is. He's not a small dude. He's a really tall, big guy. And having this tall, big, so-called nerd towering over the main villain or the secondary villain of the movie was just, it didn't look right. It just didn't. I'm sorry. And it was a huge miscasting on that part. Tyler Perry seemed like more of a menacing villain than the actual Shredder. The Shredder looked less threatening around Tyler Perry. I mean, it was sad. It really was absolutely sad. But other than that, I think they should have casted somebody else that looked a little bit more weak than Tyler Perry. But other than that, let's move on from Tyler Perry and let's talk about the overall 2 big gripes of the movie that I did not like. Now, the plot, there was a whole bunch of plot points going on. A whole bunch of plot ideas going on. Number one, you had a conflict within the Turtles to be more human and actually fit in the world. Number two, you had to deal with Stephen Amell, who was pretty much doing an origin story on what he saw and him losing his job and changing and everything. And number three, you had to deal with Vernon and how Vernon was pretty much being the scapegoat and how he was dealing with it. And then 4, you had the invasion of Krang. Now, and I guess 5, the overall mutation. The mutagen angle is gone. And I guess I'm somewhat happy with that. But at least they kind of show you that this stuff came from Dimension X. Not so much directly, but they did show you that it came from there in a way. In an indirect way. But my biggest gripe was the scientific theory behind why these guys were rhinoceroses and warthogs. There's an inner beast in every human being that is bound to come out and that actually corrects evolution. That's not what they said verbatim, but that's pretty much a cop-out in my opinion, and it kind of leads up to the main point. They used the mutagen that transform people into animals because of their inner beast, but it can also change the turtles into humans. And this is my theory on this. It literally tries to make the whole love story between Donatello and April legit. That's it. That was the overall goal of this movie. That is my theory. Is to make the turtles more legit for having a human love interest. And I wouldn't be surprised they pull that angle with Karai and Leonardo for the next movie. That's my theory. But let's move on from there. That was the most pointless scientific theory I have ever heard. I know it's a bunch of jargon. I get it. It's just a bunch of hoorah. But for crying out loud, can you at least make it somewhat realistic? I mean, in the 80s cartoon, they had 2 animals that they dragged in from a zoo, broke in the zoo, took a rhinoceros and a warthog, grabbed 2 human convicts, dragged them down to the Technodrome, took the DNA from the animal, to the DNA from the animal, injecting the humans with the mutagen. Boom, bang, boom. You got a rhinoceros and you got a warthog that used to be human. That makes more sense than what they came up with in this movie. Lazy writing. They tried to find a way to shoehorn Rocksteady and Bebop in there as quick as they possibly can. And they just didn't do it right. It just was not done right. That bugged the crap out of me. And here's another problem that I had, and it was huge. Now, a lot of people has issues with the ending. The fact that it's the same ending than the first one. In my opinion, I'm okay with that because he had to fight Krang in his own turf. And you had to see exactly how it was going to go. I have no beef with that climax leading up to the ending. The problem that I had with the ending was Lauren Linney. I don't like Lauren Linney because she plays a complete tool in every movie she's in. Like, it's no joke. She always plays the jerk in every movie that she's in. And in this one, she was the human antagonist. And it just made no sense. CIA bad. Police bad. We get it. In every movie we know authority sucks. We get it. But this chick literally had a lot of evidence in her face to show that the turtles actually were legit fighters and that they were on their side, and she still came against them. Why should I believe you? There was like multiple scenes of evidence in your face that you have witnessed, and you're still questioning that. Not to mention you fire Stephen Amell for him legitimately getting ambushed by a bunch of ninjas. And let's talk about ninjas. The Foot Clan. The Foot Clan, good job. They were actually ninjas. The bad part, the turtles barely fought. They just parkoured all the time. But other than that, the biggest part of the ending that I had was like, you can live a normal life. Everybody knows who you are. How? There was no cameras there. There was no other human witnesses there besides the cops, April O'Neil, Vernon, and Casey Jones. And also the CIA agent. They were the only people that witnessed that these turtles existed. They only knew their existence. Nobody else did. There was no cameras on them. Nobody knew who they were. So how can they live a normal life? That's something that should have been on the editing floor, especially if it doesn't make any sense. I know it's a lovely scene. I know it's a scene that can kind of somewhat sum everything all up. But you should have reshot that. You should have had an alternate ending because that made no sense. The one thing about these movies is that when everybody's hurried to get stuff out, and I understand if you have a whole lot of companies that are behind you and they're forcing you to get stuff out, and also they want you to do things their way, I understand that. There's conflict. But it makes no sense here. It doesn't. There was no way that they could live a normal life, not to mention that this entire movie is called Out of the Shadows, and they go right back in the shadows. Because they wanted to. Yeah. But other than that, guys, my overall thoughts about this movie is this. This was not a bad movie. For those who enjoy the 80s throwbacks, and especially for the 80s cartoon, for those that were around that time, you're going to enjoy this movie. For those who are casual, you're probably not going to enjoy this movie so much, but there'll be some elements in this movie that you will like. But for those who are both, you might like it. I like it. I really did. It was not as bad as the first movie. They put all the focus on the turtles. They gave an internal conflict with the turtles for being who they are. And in the very end, they accepted who they were. They didn't try to be something that they weren't. And that was a great premise there. They allowed the humans to be secondary to the turtles, and they actually gave them something to do that aided the turtles in the overall plot. Great idea. The villains were a bit weak, especially the fact that Krang, yes, looks like a big, huge water bubble gum covered in snot, but despite all that, his rubble suit was cool. You didn't see much of Shredder. Shredder didn't do much fighting. You had Karai, but she was only in there for a few scenes, but she did nothing throughout the entire thing, and that was a big bummer. But other than that, I hope they kind of improve upon that in the third one. And I'm hoping that everybody's developed and they have a bigger fight. And I'm hoping they bring in something from the Turtles lore, like neutrinos. Now that we know that Dimension X exists, let's bring in some neutrinos and maybe some newer mutants. Not so much throwback mutants or mutants from the Nickelodeon show, but let's bring some new mutants. Just saying. But other than that, guys, that's my overall thoughts, my overall review for this movie. What are yours? Leave it in the comment section below. I am curious to hear your thoughts about Ninja Turtles. I'm still a fan. That's not going to change anything. And I want to know whether or not you guys are going to see the movie or whether or not you guys are going to not see it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Naturegirl 30 signing off. Peace out, y'all. Later.